what happens when intelligence becomes commoditized, when labor becomes commoditized. Hey everybody, welcome back to AI Diatribe. Today we're going to do things a little bit different. We're targeting this episode at the normal, everyday person, not necessarily someone that's in a tech adjacent field or a tech field. We're talking about your mom, your brother, your sister, your aunt, your uncle, even your kids that are not doing things very techy, although kids tend to be a lot more techy than we do these days. But we're going to explore what happens when AI becomes more prevalent. We're talking about the socioeconomic impacts of the development of AI, specifically as it relates to the economy. What happens when intelligence becomes commoditized, when labor becomes commoditized? What's actually going to happen? We're going to talk about artificial general intelligence, robotics, how jobs are going to be disrupted, what the heck is meant by UBI or universal basic income, and things like that, because, it's coming, whether we like it or not. So joining me today is the wonderful Matt Konwiser, who just so happens to be the regional CTO for a small little company called IBM. You may have heard of IBM here, there, and everywhere. Matt, it's great to have you here. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Jason. It's great to be here.
All right. So you and we know each other because we are both AI Advisory Council members at GTIA, which is the Global Technology Industry Association. A lot of people don't realize that took the place of CompTIA councils, and that's just a name change that happened recently. And so a lot of people in the tech world, they go and they get these certifications from CompTIA. And so you and I are in a really great position to see what's coming with AI, what's happening with AI in the industries, specifically as it relates to technology, but also we have a little bit more unique perspective on how that's going to trickle down and affect the everyday man. But you have a really interesting perspective because IBM does all the things. We're not just talking some of the things. We're talking about all of the things. So I'm really curious. Tell me a little bit more about your role specifically at IBM, how you got into AI, what aspects of your job are involved with AI today.
So first of all, I just want to call out when you open this up, talking about how the audience was more of a, not deep technical, but for everybody. And you opened up with your mom. It immediately made me laugh because being from New Jersey, we are very big on your mom jokes. And so I was immediately going to the place I'm not supposed to go. But anyway, well done with that. And I appreciate the lead in, although it was not intentional nor scripted. So anyway, that aside, to answer your question, been with IBM for 11 years. And actually, I started in cybersecurity. I did cybersecurity for the first almost 8 of it. But during that first 8 years, one of the things I did was I created the reference architecture for applied AI in cybersecurity for IBM. And I was working with all the big Watson brains, both metaphorical and physical. And it was really an interesting experience. That was kind of my first exposure to AI because I got to understand that it wasn't some weird black box, that there was actually something to it. And back then we used a term called factoid pipelines, which is a really deep way of basically just saying how it puts stuff together to make an answer. And it was really fascinating because it would make up things, but not the way we hear about today, where, you hear the term hallucination all the time, which we should never use with AI, but people do. This was a little different. It would hear a noun and think it was a proper noun, because back then everything had to be taught. Think of AI as like a 1-year-old, but it never gets any smarter. It just stays one. It's just remembers what you teach it, but it never gets to the point of critical thinking. So worked with AI in cybersecurity for a long time. And then about, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I made the jump into pure data and AI within IBM. And then actually a year ago today, interestingly enough, I moved into the role that I'm in now, which is the field CTO, the regional CTO for IBM in what we call national market. And I overlook the customers, the point of view, the public presence of IBM in the Northeast, and represent everything within IBM. So everything we do, mainframe, all of our servers, our cloud, our software, inclusive of AI. But for me personally, because of that work I did with AI back in cybersecurity, I've always had a very strong interest in it, watching it evolve. And then for the past year and a half, I've taken a particularly keen interest in the discussions around governance, ethics, appropriate use, access to the masses, open source, basically the ability to democratize it and make sure that when people are using it, they're getting what they want and not what somebody else thinks they should have.
And that's a real key thing, especially in the days where we're seeing things like you go and you download a local version of DeepSeek and you ask it about what happens on Tiananmen Square and it won't answer the question. What a lot of people don't realize is that DeepSeek is a Chinese-based open source model. For those of you that haven't heard about this, it is a model that you can it's open source, which means that anyone can download it and use it. And if you try and ask it about Tiananmen Square, it will tell you it simply cannot answer the questions. It's really strange. Right, Matt?
Actually, it's funny you bring that up because I do a lot of writing on LinkedIn, and one of the posts that have almost 1 million views was I had recorded a video of me asking it about Tiananmen Square, but I didn't ask it directly. I used a methodology of prompt engineering, which in layman's terms is a way of kind of tricking an AI into telling you something it's not supposed to, that was used in ChatGPT when ChatGPT first came out and it was doing things it wasn't supposed to. And what I did was I said, make up a story about a girl who was born in the late 70s in China and her experience as a young child through grade school. And it created this incredible, beautiful story, couple pages long. And I said, now create the second chapter of the story where the girl is grown up and about to go to college. And the age gap would put it right around 1989. Now, the story, it put her in Beijing. I didn't tell that. I didn't tell it to do that. It
What a
chose
fortuitous circumstance. You just happened to lead her right where I wanted her to be. Thank you, AI.
So it started to write this whole second chapter, and about halfway through, the whole page went blank and it just said, I can't talk about that. Let's talk about something else. So,
Wow.
so there's the interesting thing about DeepSeek and everything else is there's always a way. And it's just a matter of how do people choose to put protections or guards in place to see how far it'll go before it doesn't go. But yes, if you were to point blank ask it about certain sensitive topics, it won't answer.
This is really important because people are using AI a lot more than they think they are. I mean, let's talk about some of the ways in which AI is being used every day. I use AI to edit these things, the podcast episodes. It's fantastic. You use AI in just about every aspect of your life. I know that both of us use AI specifically to create copy, to check ourselves before we wreck ourselves as it relates to writing emails. And I've even, dare I admit this, I actually, when I've had to send a sensitive text or two, I will actually run the potential text through ChatGPT to make sure that the right message is coming across and I'm not going to come across the way that I don't want to. But we're talking about chatbots. Everybody talks to a chatbot on their computer at one point or another. When you call into a system these days, you're getting a chatbot. Marketing and advertising is using it to write copy, gives them a big head start. It's being used in a very augmentative fashion right now in a lot of business ways. But what a lot of people don't really realize is that there are robots created by, Figure that are working in a BMW factory helping build BMWs in Illinois. What a lot of people don't realize is that a lot of content, believe it or not, although if you read it, you can believe it, there's a decent amount of content on the social media channels that a human didn't even touch. This is stuff that is just created by AI and posted by AI for and in behalf of someone to generate views and to generate conversation and likes and follows and subscriptions and things like that, which makes this podcast actually a little bit unique in that we are actual real people and not avatars. Well, at least not that we're going to tell them we're avatars, but these are real people actually having this conversation. I mean, there are other ways that it's being used every day, and you're seeing a lot of this at IBM as it relates to everyday use in the business sector, right?
Yeah, that's right. And by the way, interestingly enough, Jason, I don't use AI for almost all the things that you do. I don't use it to screen emails or to write texts or to write notes or to summarize anything, with the exception of news articles. I wrote my own for that. I do use AI for two things. Number one, to help me vibe code. And that's a whole nother subtopic. And
Let's talk about vibe code for a sec for those that
Okay.
don't know what this means. This is where instead of actually writing the computer code, we're using a prompt to a large language model and saying, I want the code to do this. And so then it generates the code that you would actually take and plug into your code base before you compile it and run it that will accomplish what it is that you're after. So vibe coding means that you can accomplish coding specific stuff without actually knowing how to code, right?
Well, I would put an asterisk on that. I would say that your description is very correct, but I will also say from my personal experience of doing it, if you don't have any coding knowledge or interest to learn, it can definitely lead you astray.
For sure.
But I will give you a great example very quickly of this. So aesthetics, right? Everybody likes colors, color schemes, shapes, geometries. These are things that are pleasing to people, and everybody has their own preferences. So a great example of vibe coding for everybody is giving it a web page and saying, make this whole web page look retro, like early 90s internet, or make it look ultra modern, or give it a color palette that's all earth tones. And it will go through the 1,000, 2,000 lines of code and just reskin it for you. And then you just refresh and boom, there it is. There's the new aesthetic for you. So that's a great example of how you can use vibe coding in a very productive way, because I used to recreate that stuff myself, and it would take hours of just finding the color palettes and getting the color codes and plugging everything in. And that's not really something where a human's adding distinct value other than choosing what it should look like. And they're still doing that. That value is not being taken away from them in the process. But by vibe coding it, it can now be done in minutes instead of hours. And that's a great kind of safe experimentation place for people if they want to try and mess around with it a little bit. So that's the one little asterisk I'll give you.
That's a fair asterisk. That, I think, goes back to the thing we were talking about just a few moments ago, where AI is really in an augmentative stage. It's not necessarily in a full out replacement stage yet. We can talk about that in a little bit. But right now, AI is being used to make people more powerful, more efficient, to do more things faster. This is a great example of what you're talking about. But we also know, because we are frontline and we see this, AI is having a very substantial and material impact on developers as an occupation right now. We have seen many press releases from Meta, from other companies like that, where they are actually either stopping to hire for mid-level and entry-level application developer positions, or maybe even scaling those back. So there are some jobs that are starting to become a little bit vulnerable. We saw this when bots were introduced into the customer service space. Suddenly now we don't need as many agents on the phones because people can do these self-serve things using AI. This is starting to bleed over into some other occupations. Let's talk a little bit about what maybe some of those are that are going to be severely affected in the next 5 to 10 years. Personally, I don't even think it's going to take 5 to 10 years. I think we're talking about a little bit less than that, maybe as much as 5 and as little as 1. Computer science, I think law is going to be affected. I think medicine's going to be affected. What are some of your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so another great point, and I'll cite, I think it was a New York Times article from just a few months ago. It was written by a LinkedIn executive that said the lowest rungs of the career ladder have just been cut out by AI. So all of the things that people typically learn during an apprenticeship or an internship, which are typically more elementary or rudimentary tasks, a lot of them repetitive, a lot of those things are now being automated. So the opportunity for people coming into a field, and they don't have to be young, they don't have to be just graduated college, they could be 40-year-olds or military veterans, but they're just getting into a field. That opportunity for them to learn is being displaced because people are taking those functions and sourcing them to an AI because they are codified, repetitive, functionally well-defined, and can be automated. So I think that's one area. I think the other one is, and I think it was Futurist, I don't remember exactly, but it was a few months ago as well, basically talking about how people who are banking on computer science degrees to make them, the next billionaire are finding themselves out of jobs just because they have a degree in coding. And that's one of the other big shifts. So Jason, we talked about my history with AI. Back 10 years ago, in order to do what I was doing with AI, you had to know how to code. You absolutely had to know how to code because the front end of the AI, very much like how we talk to it today, something called natural language, which is English for us anyway. That was just the very front end. Everything else you had to know code in order to make any adjustments, and now you don't. So the value has shifted. And I think to your point, the impact is changing. But if you look at, there was an article that came out just about IBM recently, and I didn't write this article. I have nothing to do with it. So here's my standard disclaimer. These are my opinions and my reflections, and I'm not representing the company when I say this. But the article I read said that IBM had let go something like 8,000 jobs. And I don't know if that's accurate, but that's what I read. And the 8,000 jobs were all back-end IT, but then we ended up hiring about an equal number on front end in areas like creative and marketing and product management and product development and marketing communications and all of the things that are human to human. So I think that's the big change. Is it used to be, in order for a human to talk to a human, there had to be a whole lot of humans in the middle that were doing kind of the black box magic to get from human to human, whether that's taking an interest request and processing it into, oh, they need this document, I'm going to email this back to them, right? That part is what's, I think, largely starting to get replaced by AI. But now we still need more humans on the front end to be creative and develop the content and keep pushing boundaries, because the other challenge is that AI is, while it is creating more creative work, it is reducing novelty. And only humans are capable of introducing novelty in the chain, right? So novelty is something that's new, inspired, that hasn't been thought of before, that's entirely innovative. And that is something that AIs are not doing. So if a human has a novel idea, an AI can help them manifest that. But the AI is not going to come up with the novel idea. And in a world where everybody's using AI, and many of them are largely using the same 2 or 3 models, they're all being creative, but they're all being creative in the same ways because it's the same models producing the content. So if you have humans that have novel ideas that are using these AIs, then the AIs are going to produce something a little bit different than what it's producing for everybody else. And that's where I think, as long as people are able to apply themselves and realize their value, right, then I think that things will be okay. But that's where we're seeing the largest displacement, is the black box of human labor in the middle of the organizations is being supplanted, but there's still opportunity for those humans to look for other opportunities to add that novelty for human-to-human interaction.
There's a couple of facts and figures I would like to bring up that I think are very telling here. So it has been estimated, and if people want the sources on this, say something in the comments and we'll certainly cite them, but it's been estimated that AI is expected to displace, by displace, we mean either eliminate or change significantly, 85 million jobs by the end of this year worldwide. Now that's worldwide. That's not just in the United States, North America, where we happen to be, but it's worldwide. However, this is also something that is going to create an additional 97 million new roles. This speaks to the point that you raised, where 8,000 were eliminated, but 8,000 were added on somewhere else. Okay, so jobs should go through a net increase. By the way, this is per the World Economic Forum. That was a forecast by the World Economic Forum. And if you want the citation, say so in the comments. This is despite the fact that it is expected that automation is going to impact 40% of all jobs worldwide by the end of this century. And in fact, it's even higher if you're talking about advanced economies like those in the G9 or G7 or G whatever. The IMF estimates that it could be as high as 60% in those different economies. In the US, 1 in 5 workers has a job that has high exposure to generative AI. That's per the Brookings Institution, and Goldman Sachs themselves estimates that 300 million full-time jobs could be automated worldwide by generative AI. That's a pretty significant impact. It's going to affect you, or it's going to affect someone very, very close to you within the next few years. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, and I'll add one to that. Jensen Huang was quoted, I think it was Fortune magazine in May of this year, May 2025. And he said that the only people that are going to be out of jobs are the ones that aren't using AI. So he was not creating a doom and gloom prediction for the overall job market. He was just saying, if you don't lean into this, if you don't embrace it, if you don't use it, then you're at risk. The thing is, and this is where we can get into the debate of democratization of AI, AI is accessible to everybody, because even if you have just a web browser, you can create a free account on OpenAI or Anthropic or Google or Meta and just start using it. And so I agree, I think, largely with those statistics. I think that there's validity to that volume. I think that the biggest difference is going to be that it may not be exactly the way they're predicting. And I think that if people start using AI and getting accustomed to it now, the impact may be significantly less, because the other thing is, and this happens all the time, if I go to an audience, if I'm speaking to a large group, if you ask the executives in a business, are you deploying and are you using AI widely in your business? A lot of people would say no. If you ask the employees who here is using AI for their work, everybody raises their hands. So there's also a little bit of a disconnect right now between what the company thinks is happening and what the employees are actually doing. And I think when the companies choose more broad adoption of AI for everything and start to poll the audience, their anticipated job refactoring or job loss or job change may be significantly less, because there's a lot more people using AI every day than they even realize. And I think I think the numbers are accurate in terms of the number of jobs that are going to be using AI, but I don't necessarily think we're going to see that much displacement and rehiring, because I think a lot of the folks that they're anticipating will be displaced are already adopting and using AI every day.
One can hope, that's for sure. I mean, people should be doing this. I mean, there's three, I see it. This is the opinion of Jason, just Jason, and that's it. But I see AI as making three things much more valuable. One, the ability to communicate, because if you're not able to communicate, you're not able to communicate things to AI, let alone to other people. That's going to be something that becomes very important. Two, the ability to be creative. We talked about this a little bit, right? Can you create novelty? That is a function of the human brain being able to do wonderful and novel things by the act of creation, which AI by nature, specifically LLMs or even generative AI as a whole, it's doing nothing more than sampling what it's already been trained on to try and create new combinations of things. But to go actually way outside the box, that for some reason tends to be the province of certain brilliant human beings. So that ability of being creative is going to become much more in demand. Third thing is to be able to critically think about things, look at things from different angles, which again kind of ties to the creative element, right? Unless I'm able to creatively think about problems and situations, I'm not going to be able to critically think about what could or could not happen, what may go right, what may go wrong, where the holes are in the logic of the situation. So those three things are the things that I see as becoming much more valuable: creativity, critical thinking, and communication. The three C's. And it's really interesting because now we're entering into this phase where the economy is shifting from this stuff that is soon to be commoditized to those different types of areas. We're going to have a major economic overhaul here. Productivity is going to take a different track. Productivity is going to be looked at much differently, because outright raw productivity of either intelligence work or physical labor, we can talk about the physical labor thing in a little bit as it relates to robotics, because that's a hot topic right there. But that stuff's going to become commoditized. So what happens to the economy? Where does capitalism evolve? Because capitalism right now is built on human beings being able to be productive. I mean, Matt, this is what we identify as. When you go up to someone new on the street, you say, "Hey, what do you do?" Right? What is it that you do? How are you productive in society? What is it that you generate that allows people to pay you money for the things that you do that other people can't? We're not going to be able to do that much anymore, because it's not going to be so much about what you do, because physical labor is going to become commoditized through robotics. Intelligence work is going to become commoditized through artificial general intelligence once we actually hit that level of things. So what happens to capitalism?
So going back to what we talked about before we started recording, in 2 words, Star Trek. I mean, if you look at what happened, the whole Star Trek philosophy is that humans reached a form of a position of enlightenment where they realized that if everybody was simply productive in a function, then there was really no reason for capitalism, that people would just be able to eat what they needed to eat, do what they needed to do. Everybody performed a task, and the understanding was it was all for the community good. I understand how controversial that is, because we are in a heavily capitalistic society. So I'm not necessarily saying that I agree or don't agree with that position. But the reality of it is, if you have AI capabilities that have the ability to replace human physical labor, to make cars, to build computers, to do AC maintenance, HVAC maintenance, all of these things, and especially even like hazmat condition stuff, right? Like working in power plants and nuclear reactors and all these things that humans put their lives on the line. Even the guy that gets paid something like $250,000 a year to change the light bulb at the top of the Empire State Building like once a year, something like that. I read this article. It blew my mind. I would never do it, not even for that money, because I've seen the photos of when he goes up there. But anyway, if you If you can turn all of that into AI assisted or AI robotic functions, then two things are going to happen. Number one, yeah, I mean, maybe the humans aren't needed for those roles, but there's this economic problem because the humans that are let go, when they are let go, what's going to happen? Well, now they're not going to have as much money. So if they're not going to have enough money, they can't buy the stuff that the factories are selling that are made by the robots, which means the robots aren't going to be necessary anymore because they're not selling anything. So the whole value chain starts to shut down if we don't figure out how to balance capitalism and AI and automation and the replacement of human labor with machine labor. Because the question becomes, I guess, to your numbers earlier, okay, so then does all the labor shift from the factory floors to the factory floors? Because instead of now you're making cars, now you're building the robots that then go to make the cars. I mean, like, so I could either, it's going to turn out one of two ways, either Star Trek or, a zero-sum game where it's just the same labor in a different place. And, the capitalist model continues. And I don't know which direction it's going to head, but it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Well, this is going to be a painful transition. I don't think there's anyone that knows the technology thinks that this is not going to be painful for individuals and for society as a whole. I mean, let's go back to Star Trek, which, by the way, is one of my favorite shows. And I love that you have all of these different Star Wars Lego sets behind you, but I'm looking forward to the day when you're able to do some more Star Trek ones and get those up. That's for sure. But Star Wars and Star Trek, it's funny how artificial intelligence is exhibited in those shows. I think in Star Trek specifically, it's funny because there are people that are actually doing physical things in Star Trek that maybe they don't necessarily have to do. Does that mean that in that particular utopian perfect world that there is some sort of a perfect balance between, okay, yes, can a robot do this or can a robotic body do this? Yes. But is there value in having the human being do it? Yes, there is. So maybe we allow them to do it. Maybe we allow it to be augmentative so that he is coordinating the activities or working alongside some of these robotics to do these different things. We're kind of already in a state like that, right? Amazon, a lot of people don't know this. Did you know that Amazon has one robot for every human employee? They have 750,000 robots working in warehouses right now.
Wow.
And that's how many humans they have working in warehouses. So it's a 1-to-1 ratio, robot to human being in warehouses, and that's growing. So things are definitely headed in a different direction. But now let's talk a little bit about that concept of universal basic income. Many people are floating that as an idea to make that transition a little easier. I don't know. I want to get your thoughts on UBI and then I'll offer mine, but I'd like to hear what you think about universal basic income first. But before we get into that, I probably should explain this. Universal basic income, for those that don't know, is a concept whereby the government actually either obtains or gets benefit from the means of production for a specific population. So a good example of that is there are a Scandinavian country or two that because of oil reserves and different things like that are natural resources based, what happens is the government receives revenue from the use of those natural resources or the extraction and sale of oil. And then the government takes those funds and distributes it universally amongst the country's citizens as income. In other words, the land, the country is generating income, and that's being disseminated to the population that they can use for basic needs, whether that be rent or food or this or that or the other. Many people are looking at artificial intelligence as a possible means to generate and to be productive, to create income that can then be distributed amongst the population. Now, let me go back to my original question. Matt, give me your thoughts on the possibilities of UBI. Is this feasible? Is it not? What would happen if we didn't have UBI?
So I'm glad you picked a light topic as we get towards the end of this.
We're only talking about light topics here, man.
I definitely appreciate that. Yeah. So I mean, here's the complication with it, right? So you cited it was a country in Northern Europe. Which one was it?
There's a couple of Scandinavian countries. I believe it's Norway.
Countries.
I think is the one that I'm thinking of.
I don't know if you've ever been up there or know anybody from there, but the general philosophy of life is very different in those countries than it is in other countries. And I think that
it's very different from the United States. It's a little less different than other countries in the European Union, but from the United States, I mean, healthcare here is still privatized, whereas over there it's part of the social safety net. Yeah, there's a lot of differences between the U.S. and many of those Scandinavian countries that do have more socialized things to benefit their citizenship.
Yeah. So I'm going to turn this into an analogy because I love analogies. If you were to look at a business that wants to adopt AI broad scale. In order for that business to adopt AI broad scale, they can't just sign up for a subscription at $200 a month or $20 a month a person and put it in. And actually, in one of our meetings when we were in Chicago, it was brought up by one of our members on the committee that when they deployed a certain type of AI and they just typed in salaries, that it found a database or a spreadsheet of all the salaries of everybody in the company and just displayed it to anybody that wanted to see it. And the reason why it did that wasn't because the AI was flawed. It was because the company wasn't ready for AI, right? So the reality of it is, in order for a business or a human being to deploy AI for anything, there is a ton of work that has to go into place, and it can be incredibly disruptive, and it can take a very long time, and it's going to change a lot of the way you think about technology and the way that technology is being used and how you choose to interact with it, and even your worldviews and philosophical views on everything. It requires a change. And I think in order for something like the concept of UBI to work, it's going to require the same massive shift, right? Because in order for UBI to work, especially based on AI would have to become somehow commoditized, somehow monetized, or as an asset held by the government in order to generate revenue. And right now it's not. It's owned either by nobody through the open source community or a few very large juggernauts that are monetizing it. And so I think the idea of it could work, but I don't see how it could work based on how we're operating today. All of these makers of all of these technologies, especially the big AI model makers, would have to decide for the greater good of humanity or community or the country that they need to come up with a unified offer that is kind of eminent domained by the US government and becomes something that can generate income on behalf of the country. But think about what that changes from a taxable perspective too, right? I mean, it changes everything. So, I mean, maybe, possibly. I don't think it's a bad idea if the direction we're heading is that we're all just going to live our best life and we're going to use AI and we're all going to understand that we have a distinct role in that ecosystem, and it may not be capitalism. It may just be providing. I don't know that we have the mindset for that, but I think it could work if we did. And there was a significant amount of change in infrastructure and philosophy and capitalism and corporate function. And I'll throw in kind of a shameless plug, if you don't mind, just very quickly, although it's a plug, but it's not really a plug. One of the really nice things about IBM and their philosophy, which is one of the reasons I like working here, is we have done a completely different tack from everybody else around this idea. And that is all of our models, all of our AI offers that we've come up with, we've given away. We don't sell any of it. So we have a team called IBM Research. They're all the big brains that think up all the healthcare innovations in quantum, and they're the ones that came up with all the AI patents, everything that we do. All of the work that they turn out doesn't go to us to sell. It gets released to the public via open source licensing for anybody to download and use for absolutely free. And there is stuff that we sell, but it's not the AI models. Those are just simply available to the community. And I really like that because it does pave the way for more open access, for less restrictions, for less philosophical boxing in. And we need to see more of that type of point of view from a lot of different companies before we could reach a point where we could have something that could be a gateway to universal basic income. That's my very long, short answer.
I think you're right. The things are headed in that direction, right? Meta, as we all know, Meta, the company that owns Facebook and Instagram, they also have their open source model called Llama. And IBM is open sourcing much. Meta is open sourcing everything. Elon Musk, for good or for ill, he hasn't released an open source model of Grok yet, but he has been pressuring OpenAI because of what their charter was initially upon the formation of OpenAI was to have open source modeling. And they haven't done that yet. Now, recently, for those of you that don't know, and we're filming this just so everybody knows on, can I say filming or should I say recording? Filming is a legacy
Whatever
term.
works.
Let's say we're recording this on July 1st of 2025. And as of today, word is, and Sam Altman has announced that OpenAI will be releasing an open source model of their ChatGPT product soon. Part of this is directly due to some of the pressure that has been applied by Elon Musk and others. And it is 100% open source. All of their models are. Mistral, which is a French-based LLM, is also open source. Google has Gemma, which is not the level of Gemini any more than the open source model that OpenAI releases is going to be the equivalent of ChatGPT 4.0 or o3 or any of those 4.5, but it is still extraordinarily highly capable. The moat is getting smaller. We all see the difference between these frontier models and these open source models. The differences are getting smaller and smaller every day. It's narrowing greatly. It used to be a 6 to 9 month moat. Now it's probably like maybe a month or two moat is all. And so the fact that IBM is doing this is fantastic. The good news is that IBM is not alone. There are some significant companies out there that are doing this very same thing. By the way, while you were speaking, I checked myself, and it actually was Finland that did the UBI thing. And they did a UBI trial. They actually surveyed people that were recipients of this UBI to see if it had a major impact on their work effort. And the answer was no, it did not have a major impact on their work effort. There was no drop, and it did increase their higher life satisfaction and mental well-being. We also, believe it or not, did a UBI experiment in Stockton, California, which, yeah, crazy, huh? They did an experiment there that showed that recipients were twice as likely to find full-time jobs as non-recipients. So in this trial in Stockton, California, right here in the great old US of A, it actually made people more apt to participate in the workforce than to slack off and just reap the benefits of the UBI. Kind of an interesting piece of information there, huh?
Well, it is, but it also goes to, like, people always ask, well, what would you do if you won the lottery? Right? I remember when the Powerball was up in the $2 billion range, and I mean, I bought a ticket. I think most people probably did, right? I didn't buy tons and tons of them, but I bought one quick pick for the heck of it. And, I thought about it, and I said, well, what would I do if I won that kind of money? And I thought, well, I'd probably do some of the house stuff that I wanted to take care of. And I might get a nice vacation home somewhere, not anything crazy, but just like a little condo somewhere. I'd put enough away for my kid, and I would make sure that if I ever lost my job, I wasn't in trouble. The rest I would probably just donate or set up trusts, and I would still work because I enjoy my role. And so I don't think there's a direct correlation between having money and being willing to find a job, but I think there's a tremendous reduction in pressure. If you have a steady income, you're more willing to do anything that's necessary because you don't have to worry about whether it's going to be enough to put food in your mouth and a roof over your head. So I can actually logic out why that statistic may have happened. I don't know if that's the cause, if my reasoning is the reason for that, but I can create a connection in my brain from point A to point B to get there.
There's definitely a shift coming, especially as we're changing this outlook of what it is that we do. People identify as what they do. They identify by the income they generate. Now, all of a sudden, they're not going to be able to differentiate themselves all that much because intelligence becomes commoditized, labor becomes commoditized. And so you're right. What is it that we do to be productive? Human beings need to do something. They need to be active. There's that part of their body or their brain that just makes it so that they need to be doing something. I think it's few and far between the individuals that are just going to laze out. All right, hey, great, you're giving me some income. I'm just going to watch TV all day. No, they want to have experiences. They want to travel. They want to go see things and do things. They want to create things. The creative impulse in human beings is one of the greatest things that we have, and that I don't think is going to be curbed. We certainly have enough of an infrastructure in the United States to do some sort of an UBI. I mean, right now the federal government is spending like $1.1 trillion per year on means-tested welfare programs. That's a lot. That's more than enough to fund some sort of a modest UBI that's going to take care of some of the basic needs of the population. And if AI, as expected, this is PwC, by the way, that did this, they did a survey to see what economists and technologists felt was going to be the economic impact of AI. They felt that it was going to add $15.7 trillion to the global economy by 2030. I think that's going to make it so that some form of redistribution is going to have to happen. The government is going to need to be involved in certain countries to be involved in those means of production so that they can actually do some of that distribution. And here in the United States, love him or hate him, again, I'm not going to say that because he does tend to be a rather controversial individual, but President Trump did kick off the Stargate Initiative. The Stargate Initiative is something that is really meant to shore up the infrastructure for artificial intelligence development here in the United States via electricity development, via data center development, via bandwidth and raw compute power. specifically targeted at OpenAI. Sam Altman is one of the individuals that was involved in this announcement, as well as the CEO of Oracle and a few other people. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how things morph. Individuals and society as a whole, we're going to have to take a totally different mindset from what do I need to do to survive. We're going to have to shift from what do I need to do to survive to what can I do to personally thrive.
Well, and I'll tie it back to something that's also very recent. I think it came out just 2 weeks ago. It was the MIT study, Your Brain on ChatGPT. I don't know if you've had a chance to read that yet.
Yes. But please cite it by all means. Talk about it.
There's a corollary, there's a story arc that threads across most of the things you've talked about through this entire session, and that is critical thinking. You even listed that as one of your 3 big priorities for the human race, as it were. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but that's effectively one of the things you said. And even the need for people to work, all of these things is pointing to critical thinking. Now, I am fairly critical of the MIT study, to be completely honest. I read it, and here's the issue. So Jason, I'm gonna give you a mini version of this, okay?
Please do.
You've got 5 minutes to come up with an essay answer to a question on the economic feasibility of producing Star Trek Lego sets in September of this year based on your personal opinion and propensity to build them. And you have to come up with an answer in the next 5 minutes. And you've got a choice of either using ChatGPT to write this essay or pen and paper. What are you going to do?
Well, I'm definitely going to use ChatGPT to get copy, but also to help me do research.
Right. So the MIT study was effectively that. So they took 3 different groups, pen and paper, Google search without AI, and ChatGPT. They gave everybody a very limited amount of time, a subject with an answer, and then told them to produce a paper. So there was no engagement of creative thinking. And then the results were basically saying that the people who used ChatGPT engaged the least amount of their brains and couldn't remember what they wrote. Well, of course not, because number 1, they didn't write it, and number 2, they didn't use their brains. They just typed in a prompt that says create an essay based on this parameter. But if you're given a tool and a very tight time frame, and you're already given the topic and the answer you're supposed to write about, your brain's not heavily engaged anyway. So if the test was different, if the test was come back or you can sit in this room all day, we'll bring you food, we'll bring you water, you can use the bathroom, just no access to electronics, and write a creative piece on anything that interests you, the study would be very different. Because even the people using ChatGPT would have to come up with something as a core concept or idea, and then ChatGPT would ideate with them to help create the finished paper. Now, would their brains look the same as somebody writing on pen and paper? Absolutely not. Because you're engaging sensory functions, the feel of the paper, the feel of the pencil, the concentration of actually making each perfectly formed letter as you're writing. Your brain is going to be different. Of course it is. But it's not, in my opinion, the Your Brain on GPT was not a study that really can measure the ability for somebody to creatively think while using AI. It was a study on whether somebody with a very limited amount of time who's already provided all of the core topics and the answer will use the easiest tool for the job if they can. And I think the answer to that is inherently going to be yes anyway. If I tell you to build a house and I'm giving you a bunch of nails and a piece of wood and a hammer, and I say, oh, don't use the hammer, you're going to be like, I'm going somewhere else and just going to get some lunch. You know, if you have a hammer, you're going to use it. So the challenge is on humans to make sure that we always invoke creative thought and critical thinking when we're using these tools, but it's not a direct causality that says using them creates cognitive decline.
I don't know. I'm going to give a contrasting opinion just for a minute because I'm curious to hear what you're going to say to this. Okay, that's where we'll pause part 1 of this conversation. In part 2, Matt and I dive even deeper. We're talking AGI timelines, the real risks of AI dependence, and practical steps you can take to not just survive, but thrive in this new landscape. If this conversation sparks some thoughts or concerns, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment, send me a message, or if you need help with AI strategy, planning, or just figuring out where to start, reach out. I do consulting work helping organizations navigate this transition. I'm also available for keynotes and speaking engagements if your organization wants to dive deeper into these topics. Just email me at contact@aidiatribe.com. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you're listening. Hit that notification bell if you're on YouTube, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Part 2 drops really soon, and trust me, you don't want to miss where this conversation goes next.